The blindfold was the thing she remembered most clearly. Not the men, she had not seen the men. That was the point of the blindfold. Not the carriage, which she had heard and felt but not seen. Not the road, which had been long and dark, and had moved beneath her for what felt like most of a night. Not even the particular quality of her own fear, which had been present and considerable, and which she had managed with the systematic attention of someone who has decided that fear is information, and information is more useful than panic. The blindfold. The specific texture of it against her closed eyes, the way it had been tied efficiently, without cruelty, by someone who had done this before or had been told precisely how to do it by someone who had. The particular care of it, that was what she returned to in the years afterward, when she was trying to understand the full shape of what had been planned. Not the violence of it, there had been no violence. That was also the point, but the care. The preparation. The particular thoroughness of a woman who had thought about this for long enough that she had considered the blindfold and decided on its precise method of application. Lady Harrow had always been thorough. Eliza understood this now with the cold clarity of someone who has had 5 years to examine a single night from every available angle. She understood it in the workhouse in the first weeks, when no one came looking, not Edmund, not his people, not Whitmore, her father's solicitor, not a single person from the county she had been born in. She had waited with the particular patience of someone who believes the waiting has a limit. Then she had understood that the waiting had no limit, because as far as the county she had been born in was concerned, Eliza Voss was dead. She had been sold. She understood this also not immediately, but in pieces, over the first month, as the workhouse master referred to her intake papers under a name that was not hers, and as the arithmetic of her situation became clear. She had been a transaction, Lady Harrow's most pressing debts, cleared in a single night, the most efficient available solution to the problem of a stepdaughter who would, in 4 more years, inherit everything. She had sat with this for a long time. Then she had begun to plan. Before we go any further, if you have ever been erased by someone who was supposed to protect you, this story is for you. Stay until the very end. Because what happens 5 years later, on a Wednesday morning, in a market town street, is not simply a reunion. It is a reckoning. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit the like button. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of those actions reaches back to us and matters more than you know. Now, back to Eliza, because she has been building something for 5 years without knowing who she was building it toward. And Edmund has been grieving for 5 years without knowing his grief had the wrong object. And somewhere on the road north, a carriage is about to pass through a market town on a Wednesday morning. Eliza's father had been a man of the particular kind that Victorian England produced occasionally, and did not entirely know what to do with genuinely warm, genuinely intelligent, constitutionally unable to imagine the kind of calculation that Lady Harrow was capable of, because he was simply not built for it. He had loved Eliza's mother with the complete devotion of someone who does not know how to love partially, and had been undone by her death in the particular way of genuinely loving people, which is to say, completely and for a long time. He had met Lady Harrow 3 years after Eliza's mother died. Eliza had been 14, watchful, precise, not easily fooled. She had seen through Lady Harrow within the first month. She had said nothing because her father was happy, and because she could find no mechanism for saying something that would not simply be received as a 14-year-old's resistance to change. She had watched, and she had waited. Her father had died when she was 21. A fever. 6 days. The physician had been honest from the 4th day. Eliza had been at his bedside, and had held his hand, and had not let go. The will had been read a fortnight later. Everything to Eliza, the estate, the income, the investments contingent on her reaching the age of 25. A standard provision. Her father's solicitor, Whitmore, had drafted it with care. Her father had signed it with the trust of a man who had never needed to imagine what the person managing his household had already identified in the provision and begun calculating how to use. 4 years. That was the gap. 4 years during which Lady Harrow controlled the household, the accounts, the access. 4 years during which the inheritance remained inaccessible and Eliza remained, in the legal architecture of the will, dependent. Lady Harrow had begun her calculation immediately. She had been patient, methodical, thorough, working through every available option and eliminating each one until she arrived at the cleanest solution. Not illness, too uncertain, too slow, too visible. Not accident, too difficult to control, too many questions. The fake death was the most elegant available mechanism. A staged drowning, Eliza's shawl recovered from the river. A witness managed. A county official, whose relationship with Lady Harrow predated the marriage, and whose flexibility regarding documentation had been cultivated over years. A death certificate, issued within the week, and Eliza, blindfolded in a carriage on a road 3 days' travel from everything she had ever known, sold for the precise sum required to clear Lady Harrow's 3 most pressing debts. The workhouse was called Greystone. It was in a county called Wiltshire, and it smelled of lye soap and damp stone, and a particular compound smell of many people living in insufficient space with insufficient warmth. Eliza had arrived in the grey morning after the night in the carriage, her wrists untied at the gate, the blindfold removed by a man who had not looked at her face, handed to the workhouse master with the intake papers and a sum of money and no further explanation. The workhouse master was a man of 50, named Briggs. He was not cruel by nature, he was simply indifferent in the way of someone who has administered a system for long enough that the people inside it have become categories rather than persons. He had looked at the intake papers, noted the false name, assigned Eliza to the laundry, and gone back to his office. Eliza had stood in the laundry for a moment. She had looked at the women around her, the particular faces of people who had been categories for a long time, and had begun to accept the category as definition. She had made herself a promise. She was not going to become a category. She did not know yet how she was going to avoid it. But she was not. The first year was the hardest. Not because of the work was brutal and specific, and she did it with the systematic attention of someone who has decided that competence is the only available form of dignity. Not because of the cold, though the cold was considerable, and the blankets insufficient. It was hardest because of the silence where Edmund should have been, the particular absence of a person who was looking for you, and finding nothing because the thing they were looking for had been erased so thoroughly that there was nothing left to find. She had been engaged to Edmund for 4 months when Lady Harrow took her. 4 months, not long enough for most people, long enough for Eliza, who did not make decisions slowly or partially. She had known within the first month that Edmund Carew was the kind of man she had been looking for without knowing she was looking. Precise, attentive, the particular quality of someone who takes people seriously and does not require them to perform themselves to earn that seriousness. He had proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in the library of Blackwell Estate with the direct and unhurried certainty of a man who has made a decision and sees no reason to dress it in performance. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. 4 months later she was in a laundry in Wiltshire, under a name that was not hers, and Edmund Carew was standing at a graveside in the county she had been born in, composed, managing his devastation carefully. Speaking to Lady Harrow with the courtesy of a man who does not know, he is speaking to the person who took everything from him. She did not allow herself to think about this in the first year. In the second year she thought about it carefully and systematically, and arrived at a conclusion that sat in her like a cold stone. He thought she was dead. He was grieving. He had no mechanism for finding her, because the mechanism required knowing she was alive, and he did not know she was alive, because Lady Harrow had been thorough. She had wept about this on one night in February of the second year. A single night, a single accounting. The particular private grief of someone who has lost something that was not yet fully theirs but had been sufficiently hers to leave a specific shaped absence. Then she had set it aside and gone back to planning. By the end of the second year she had identified the mechanism of escape, a gap in the rotation of the night watch on Thursdays, a door in the east wall that was locked, but whose lock had a specific weakness. She had been observing for 4 months. She had waited for a Thursday in March, when the night watch was short-staffed and the moon was dark. She had walked out of Greystone at 2 in the morning with nothing but the clothes on her back and the particular cold clarity of someone who has been planning this for 8 months and is executing it correctly. She had walked for 2 days. She had found work in a farmhouse. She had worked there for 3 months and saved what she could, and then moved again north, away from the county she had been born in, away from everything that connected to the name she had been born with. She had arrived in a market town called Ashford-on-Wye in the summer of 1883 with £3, a change of clothing, and a name she had chosen herself, Eleanor Marsh, because choosing your own name after someone else has taken yours is one of the small available forms of reclamation. She had built from there with the systematic intelligence of a woman who has nothing and intends to have something. She had found work first as a seamstress, competent, careful, punctual, the qualities that produce recommendation, and then as a bookkeeper for a draper's shop whose accounts had been in disorder for 3 years and which she had straightened in a fortnight. The draper had told his neighbour. The neighbour had told someone else. By the end of the 3rd year, she had 3 regular clients for the accounts work and had begun taking on correspondence for a solicitor's office 2 streets away. By the 5th year, she had a small office of her own, 2 rooms above a stationer's shop, a brass plate on the door that said E. Marsh Accounts and Correspondence, a regular income, a reputation in the town for precision and discretion, and a life she had built entirely by her own hands from nothing. She did not think about the county she had been born in. She had decided this in the 3rd year, with the particular deliberateness of a woman making a decision. She intends to keep that the life before the carriage was a country she had left, and that looking back at it accomplished nothing useful, and cost her things she could not afford. She had kept the decision. She had not kept it perfectly. There were nights, specific nights, when something broke through the decision, and she thought about Edmund with the full, unmanaged weight of 5 years of suppressed grief. But she had kept it well enough. She had managed. She had not been managing on the Wednesday morning in the spring of 1886, when she walked out of the stationer's shop with a package of correspondence under her arm, and heard a carriage stop in the street behind her, and heard a man say her name, her actual name, not Eleanor, not Marsh, Eliza. She stopped walking. She stood very still on the pavement, with the package under her arm, and the particular quality of someone who has just heard something that should be impossible and is deciding whether to believe it. The decision, the country she had left, the 5 years of careful management, all of it balanced in the 3 seconds before she turned. She turned. He was standing 20 feet away in the middle of the street. He had come out of the carriage so fast it had not fully stopped. The horses were still settling, the driver looking back with confusion. He was in a dark travelling coat, hat slightly askew from moving too quickly, grey eyes fixed on her face with the expression of a man whose entire body has stopped functioning except for the seeing. She looked at him across 20 feet of Market-town Street. 5 years. The same face, older, something heavier in it that had not been there before. The particular weight of grief that has been carried long enough to become structural. The same grey eyes. The same quality of attention that she had fallen in love with in 4 months and had spent 5 years not thinking about. Eliza, he said again, not a question. The particular way you say a name when you are saying it to confirm to yourself that the word is connected to something real. She said, Edmund. The street continued its ordinary Wednesday morning business around them. A cart passed. A woman with a basket nodded at someone across the road. The world entirely indifferent to the fact that 2 people were standing in the middle of it, accounting for 5 years of silence. He crossed the 20 feet. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, all of it. The 5 years of it with the complete and unguarded attention of a man who has been looking at the wrong absence for a very long time and has just found the correct object. You are alive, he said. Yes, she said. You have been here for 2 years. Before that, elsewhere. He was very still. How long have you known? I thought you were dead. She looked at him steadily. Since the 2nd year. Something moved across his face that she could not entirely read. Not anger, something larger and less defined than anger. The particular expression of a man absorbing an account whose dimensions he is only beginning to understand. Come, he said. Tell me everything. They sat in the back room of the inn, on the market square, for 3 hours. She told him everything. not dramatically in the precise and ordered way she told things, beginning with the night of the carriage and proceeding through Greystone and the escape and the 3 years of building and the 2 years in Ashford-on-Wye. She told it the way she had rehearsed it in her own mind on the nights when the decision about the country she had left had been insufficient. Clearly, completely, without embellishment. He listened to all of it, without interrupting. She watched his face move through the account, through Greystone specifically, which produced something in his expression she had not seen before and did not have a precise name for. Through the escape, through the building of the small life, through the name on the brass plate above the stationer's shop. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Lady Harrow." "Yes," she said. "She told me you had gone walking by the river, that your shawl was found, that the current—" He stopped. "She was thorough," Eliza said. "Yes," he said. "She was." Another silence. "Did you know," he said carefully, "that I thought you were dead?" "Yes, eventually." "And you did not come back?" She looked at him. This was the question she had been carrying since the 2nd year, the one she had answered for herself many times in many ways and had never answered entirely satisfactorily. "I did not know," she said, "what I would be coming back to. Whether you had moved on, whether arriving would simply be more disruption, more damage to something that had already been damaged enough by Lady Harrow's arithmetic." He was very still. "I did not move on," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know that now," she said. "I did not know it then. You should have come back." "Perhaps," she said, "but I had built something, and I was not certain that what I had built could survive being unmade for a life that might not receive me correctly." He looked at her with the grey eyes that had found her face across 20 feet of street, and had not looked away since. "I would have received you correctly," he said. "I know that now," she said again. "I did not know it then." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the inn, the Wednesday market continued its ordinary business. Carts, voices, the unremarkable sounds of a town going about its life entirely indifferent to what was being accounted for inside the back room of the inn on the square. "I am going to need 3 weeks," he said. She looked at him. "For what?" "To build the case," he said simply. "Will you stay?" She looked at him across the table. This man who had stopped his carriage on a Wednesday morning without deciding to, who had said her name across 20 feet of street before he had processed what he was seeing, who had listened to 3 hours of Greystone and the escape and the brass plate and the 5 years without flinching once. "I have a business," she said. "I know," he said. "It will still be there in 3 weeks." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, 3 weeks. He spent the 3 weeks with the systematic thoroughness of a man who has been given a very clear task and intends to execute it without error, because this is the only opportunity he will have. He found Briggs, the workhouse master who had kept records of every intake with the particular bureaucratic precision of someone who understood that records were protection and had never anticipated that his protection would become evidence. The intake papers were there. The false name. The date. The sum paid. The county of origin listed as a cover county, 2 days' travel from Eliza's actual county of origin. Lady Harrow had been careful, but not careful enough to anticipate someone who already knew the correct county. He found the county official who had issued the death certificate, a man named Greer, whose flexibility had been purchased by Lady Harrow over 6 years of careful cultivation. Greer, when presented with what Edmund had already assembled, made the calculation that a man of flexible integrity makes when he understands that the person across from him has enough to proceed without his cooperation and considerably more incentive to proceed well with it. He provided a written statement in exchange for a qualified immunity that Whitmore arranged through the proper channels. He found Whitmore Eliza's father's solicitor, the honest one who had been uncomfortable about the death from the beginning, in the way of a precise man who finds that the available facts do not quite produce the conclusion he has been asked to accept. Whitmore had kept his discomfort private for 5 years because he had no evidence and no living complainant. He had both now. He spent 2 weeks reviewing the estate's full financial records, with the focused fury of a man whose professional integrity has been offended at a structural level and who intends to document every instance. He found the sum. Lady Harrow's debts, the precise amounts, the dates of clearance, the accounts they were cleared from, the workhouse payment, matched to the penny. The documentary trail was not thin. Lady Harrow had been thorough, but thoroughness leaves records. It was simply a matter of finding someone who was more thorough than she was. He returned to Ashford-on-Wye on a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after the Wednesday morning. Eliza was in her office above the stationer's shop. She was finishing a set of accounts for the solicitor's office 2 streets away. The quarterly reconciliation, clear and precise, moving through the numbers with the natural ease of someone who has been reading accounts since her father's letter book when she was 18. She heard the carriage, and she set down her pen, and she looked at the door. He knocked. She opened it. He was carrying a leather satchel that she understood immediately from its weight, and his expression contained everything. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. She stood back. He came in. He set the satchel on her desk beside the quarterly accounts, and he opened it, and he placed the documents in the order he had determined was most effective, beginning with the death certificate and its documented fraudulence, proceeding through Greer's statement, through Briggs's intake records, through Whitmore's financial analysis, through the matched sum. He placed each document with the careful precision of a man presenting something he has built to hold weight and is confident it will hold. She read them in order. She read them carefully. She did not rush. He sat across from her, and he waited, because he was a man who knew how to wait, and because the reading deserved the time she was giving it. When she finished, she set the last document down. She looked at the pile of them on her desk beside the quarterly accounts, 5 years of Lady Harrow's calculation, documented completely, assembled for the correct use. "Whitmore," she said. "He is ready," Edmund said. "The county assembly meets in 3 weeks." She looked at him. "You want to do this publicly?" "Lady Harrow has been managing a public account for 5 years," he said. "The correction should be public." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the brass plate on the door E. Marsh Accounts and Correspondence, the name she had chosen for herself in the summer of 1883, because choosing your own name is one of the small available forms of reclamation. "I will need something to wear," she said. "I know," he said. "I brought someone who can help with that." She looked at him. "You brought a dressmaker to Ashford-on-Wye." "I brought my housekeeper," he said. "She is considerably more efficient than a dressmaker, and she has opinions." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face that had not moved in 5 years. Not warmth performed, not social pleasantness. The real version, the one that arrived before she could decide whether to permit it. "You are," she said. "Exactly as you were." "No," he said. "I am not. But the parts that matter are the same." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I know." The county assembly met on a Friday evening in April. Lady Harrow was present in deep burgundy silk, with the composed social authority of a woman who has managed her position for 5 years without challenge and has no reason to expect challenge now. She was speaking to the county magistrate's wife when the door opened. She heard the change in the room before she identified its cause. The particular shift in the quality of a social occasion, when something has entered it that has changed the occasion's nature. She turned. Eliza was standing in the doorway. Not Eleanor Marsh. Not the false name and the small life in Ashford-on-Wye. Eliza Voss, dark hair, pinned with the particular precision of a woman who has made every decision about this evening deliberately, in a dark green dress that belonged to her and had always belonged to her, standing in the doorway of the county assembly room, with Edmund Carew beside her and a leather satchel in his hand. Lady Harrow's composure did not collapse. She was not constituted for collapse. But something happened in her face that everyone in the room could see, the particular expression of a woman whose calculation has just been demonstrated to be insufficient in every particular. Edmund did not call for silence. He did not need to. The room had already produced its own silence, the particular quality of complete and collective attention that arrives when a room understands simultaneously that something significant is happening. He spoke for 15 minutes. He presented every document in the order he had designed: the death certificate, Greer's statement, the intake records, the financial analysis, the matched sum. He presented it with the unhurried completeness of a man who has been carrying a grief for 5 years and has just discovered its correct shape and is giving that shape to the people who need to see it. Lady Harrow sat with her spine straight and her hands folded and her expression arranged with the last available reserves of a composure that had been the primary instrument of her entire adult life. She said nothing. There was nothing available to say. Edmund had assembled something that did not require her participation to proceed. Whitmore stood beside Edmund and confirmed each document as it was presented with the flat, professional precision of a man whose integrity has been offended for 5 years and who is experiencing the particular satisfaction of correct documentation finally arriving at its correct use. When Edmund finished, he turned to Eliza. She was standing to his right, with the composed and entirely unperformative attention she gave to everything that mattered. She looked at Lady Harrow across the assembly room, the woman who had taken her name and sold her in a transaction, and then managed the county's account of her death for 5 years, with the thoroughness she gave to everything. She did not speak to Lady Harrow. She had decided this in the carriage on the way, that she had nothing to say to Lady Harrow that the documents had not already said more precisely. She simply looked at her for one long moment, with the direct and unembellished attention of a woman who has accounted for this and set it in its correct place and is not going to give it more space than it deserves. Then she looked away. Edmund offered his hand. She looked at it for one moment, the hand of a man who had stopped a carriage on a Wednesday morning and said her name across 20 feet of street before he had decided to, who had spent 3 weeks in workhouse records and county official statements and financial archives, building something that held weight because he was a man who built things that held weight. She took his hand. The room watched. Someone began to speak. Several more people began to speak. The county assembly resolved itself back into the organized noise of a social occasion that has just witnessed something it will be discussing for years. Lady Harrow stood. She walked to the door, with her spine straight, and her jet brooch catching the candlelight, and her composure held by the last available effort of a woman whose composure has been her primary weapon and has just been permanently disarmed. She went through the door. She did not look back. The criminal proceedings took 18 months. They were thorough. Whitmore made certain of that, and they concluded in a manner that satisfied him enormously, and that Eliza followed with the systematic attention of a woman watching something she has been owed for 5 years arrive at its correct destination. Lady Harrow was removed from the Voss estate within the fortnight of the assembly. The estate was restored to Eliza in full, with 5 years of accumulated income that Whitmore's analysis had documented to the penny, and that was returned through the legal process with the particular completeness of correct arithmetic. Finally applied to correct figures. Greer's qualified immunity was narrow and precisely drawn, and protected him only in the specific matter of the death certificate. The other irregularities Whitmore identified in the estate's records during his 6 weeks of analysis produced separate proceedings that Greer had not anticipated, and that concluded poorly for him. Briggs, the workhouse master, was not prosecuted. The intake had been performed in good faith on the basis of documents that appeared legitimate. He was, however, required to appear as a witness and to produce his records, and the experience produced in him a subsequent attentiveness to the documentation of intake transactions that several subsequent inmates benefited from. Eliza returned to Ashford-on-Wye once after the assembly. She went to the office above the stationer's shop, and she took down the brass plate from the door, and she held it for a moment. Marsh accounts and correspondence. The name she had made in a summer, when she had nothing, and had needed something to be. She kept the plate. She put it in the leather case beside the intake records and Greer's statement and the matched financial summary, the full account of 5 years, assembled and documented and complete. She carried it out of the office and down the stairs and into the carriage that was waiting. She did not look back at the building. She had decided this the way she had decided everything since the carriage and the blindfold, deliberately, without remainder. Edmund proposed on a Tuesday afternoon. Not in a library this time, on the road between Ashford-on-Wye and the county they had both been born in the carriage. in the particular quality of late afternoon light that comes through carriage windows and makes everything look simultaneously ordinary and important. He did not make a performance of it. He said that he had spent 5 years with the wrong grief, and that he intended to spend the rest of the available time with the correct person, and that he hoped she would permit him to do that correctly. She had looked at him for a moment. She had thought about the brass plate in the leather case, the 2 years in the office above the stationer's shop, the 3 years before that, the escape, the farmhouse, the building from nothing. The name she had chosen for herself in the summer of 1883. She had thought about her father and the will, and Lady Harrow's arithmetic, and the night of the carriage, and the blindfold, and the 5 years of Greystone and Ashford-on-Wye, standing between the Tuesday afternoon in the library of Blackwell Estate, when she had said yes, before he finished the sentence, and this Tuesday afternoon in a carriage on the road between 2 counties. Yes, she said. The same answer as before. He looked at her. You remember? I said yes before you finished the sentence, she said. I remember everything precisely. Something moved in his face. So do I, he said. They were married in June in the Blackwell Estate Chapel, small, deliberate, theirs. Whitmore attended and sat in the front row, with the expression of a man whose professional life has just produced its most satisfying conclusion. The housekeeper, who had come to Ashford-on-Wye with opinions, sat in the second row and wept openly and was entirely unembarrassed. 3 of Eliza's clients from the accounts work attended because she had written to them and because they had come without being entirely certain why and had understood when they arrived. Eliza wore the dark green dress from the county assembly. Her dress, belonging to her, the dress she had been wearing when Edmund had stopped his carriage on a Wednesday morning and said her name across 20 feet of street. She had decided it was the correct dress for this occasion, because it was the dress that had been present at the beginning of the correct version of things. Edmund held both her hands during the vows. He looked at her face, the face he had found across 20 feet of Market Town Street, after 5 years of finding nothing, with the complete and deliberate attention of a man who does not intend to look away again. She looked back. 5 years of Greystone, and escape, and building from nothing, standing behind her like a country she had finally left. The brass plate in the leather case in the trunk in the carriage outside. The window of Blackwell Estate that was hers now, her window, her morning, her life arranged around her exactly as it should be. The vicar spoke the words. The chapel was very still. Outside, the June morning was warm and entirely indifferent to its own beauty the way June mornings are. They left the chapel into the morning, and the morning received them without ceremony in the way of mornings that have no opinion about the people moving through them and require nothing except that you continue. Lady Harrow served 2 years in a correctional institution in the South and was released into the particular social invisibility of a woman whose reputation has been publicly and permanently corrected. She lived out her remaining years in rented rooms in a city where she was not known. Eliza arranged nothing for her, not from hatred, from the particular clarity of a woman who has examined the question of what she owes Lady Harrow and has arrived at the correct answer, which is nothing. The clarity was clean and sufficient, and she did not revisit it. The brass plate was placed on the wall of the Blackwell Estate Library, not displayed, simply placed on the shelf beside the estate accounts that Eliza had taken over from Edmund's previous bookkeeper within a fortnight of arriving and had straightened in a week. Marsh Accounts and Correspondence. Edmund had found it in the leather case and asked about it, and she had told him, and he had asked if she wanted it put somewhere, and she had said the library shelf, and he had placed it there without comment. She looked at it sometimes, the name she had chosen for herself, the 2 rooms above the stationer's shop, the life she had built from nothing when nothing was all that was available. She was not sorry she had built it. She had needed to know that she could. She had needed to know that the person she was existed independently of the county she had been born in, and the inheritance and Edmund and everything Lady Harrow had tried to reduce her to. She knew it now. She carried it with her the way you carry things that cost you considerably and taught you precisely what they cost. She managed the Blackwell Estate accounts for the next 30 years. She found 2 irregularities in the first year, minor ones, legacy errors, and corrected them without ceremony. She established an auditing process. She took on 3 other estate clients through recommendation, which Edmund accepted with the equanimity of a man who has understood from the brass plate, and the Thursday escape, and the 3 years of building, that his wife's professional competence is not a variable he is in a position to manage, and has no desire to. They were good years. Not without difficulty 5 years apart, does not resolve itself entirely into one June morning, and they had both changed in ways that required honest accounting rather than pretending. But they did the honest accounting. They were both people who preferred accuracy to comfort when accuracy and comfort were in conflict, and this produced between them over the years a particular quality of ease. Not the ease of 2 people who have never been tested, but the ease of 2 people who have been tested separately and have come back to each other with full information and have decided with that full information that this is what they choose. Edmund kept the intake records from Greystone in the locked drawer of his library desk, not as a wound, as a reminder of what thoroughness in the wrong direction could accomplish, of what thoroughness in the correct direction could answer. He had been more thorough than Lady Harrow. It had turned out that was all it took. Eliza stood at the window of Blackwell Estate on ordinary mornings in the years that followed, and she looked out at ordinary things, the grounds, the road, the particular quality of morning light, through old glass, and she thought about the blindfold. She still thought about it. She had decided not to stop thinking about it in the way she had decided not to cover the brass plate and not to change the name on the case, because the blindfold was part of the account, and the account was hers, and she was not interested in presenting an edited version of it to herself or to anyone else. What Lady Harrow had done was not simply a transaction. It was an erasure, the deliberate and systematic removal of a person from their own life, sold for the cost of 3 debts, replaced with a shawl on a riverbank and a certificate and a story managed carefully for 5 years. She had been thorough. She had been almost sufficient. Almost. The word that ended Lady Harrow's calculation, almost sufficient, because she had not accounted for a man who looked out of carriage windows on Wednesday mornings and whose grief had kept the correct shape for 5 years without knowing what it was the correct shape of. Almost sufficient because Eliza had walked out of Greystone on a Thursday night in March and built something from nothing and had been building it in the right direction without knowing what direction she was building toward. Almost. The most expensive word in Lady Harrow's arithmetic. Edmund had found her. She had been found. These were both true simultaneously, and neither cancelled the other, and that was the most honest way to hold them. Thank you so much for staying to the very end. If Eliza's story moved something in you, if the image of a man stopping his carriage on a Wednesday morning and saying a name across 20 feet of street stayed with you, then please do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of you matters to this library. Until next time, the doors are always open.